What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Not So Stupid podcast. Today, I have a very special episode that I think a huge majority of people listening will find a lot of value in. I know I found a lot of value in this, and it is really going to help me help my clients to another level. Today's guest is Laura Poburan. Laura Poburan is the founder of TriggerMapping, which is a certification and mentorship program designed to help nutrition professionals radically change the lives of the people they're called to serve by infusing traditional nutrition practice with deep connection and neuroscience. In this episode, we break down a lot of personality traits that most people will identify or tie food to, and how you can break those and find the actual root cause of what food is causing you to lack, or what food is filling the void in your life, what you're using food to fill the void in your life with. Really powerful stuff. I'm going to say that term super powerful because there are a lot of amazing gems that Laura shares with us today, and I can't wait for you guys to get to hear it. So without further ado, here is the interview with Laura Poburan.
All right, Laura Poburan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm psyched to be here. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's great seeing you too. I'm so excited to have you on. So for the people that don't know who you are, why don't you share a little bit about yourself? Tell your story, how you got here and what you do.
Sounds great. Yeah. So I've been in the nutrition space for about 13 years now. I started out as a personal trainer working for someone else all that time ago. And from there, I opened a gym with my husband when I graduated university, which was amazing for a time. We had that gym for between 4 and 5 years. In the last year, we took this huge expansion jump. We quadrupled the size of our space. We hired a team, and we ended up really lacking passion in that new role. Felt disconnected from our community. We felt disconnected from really being able to create change in the people that always lit us up. We were now like managers instead of coaches. And so we ended up walking away from the gym. We ended up taking a huge financial hit and decided to find our passion somewhere else. And that really is what was a catalyst for me to where I am now, which is working with coaches on developing their skill set to be able to reach their clients more deeply and evoke really powerful change in their life. So what we're going to be talking about today is kind of this beautiful meld between my life as a coach working with nutrition clients combined with what I do now in terms of helping coaches really reach their clients on a deeper level and evoke change in a subconscious way. So it's really cool to be here. I could never have told you years ago that I would be working with coaches now, but it's really a neat place to be in for sure.
Yeah, it's a crazy transition because you go from a gym and people see that from the outside looking in, and it's like, wow, they just expanded and they're doing awesome and it's so great.
Yes.
But you
Oh,
guys weren't as happy as it might have seemed.
no, you know what? Like that last year, I was awarded best trainer in my city. Our
Oh,
gym was
wow.
runner up for best facility in our city. Like from the outside, we were crushing. But
Mhm.
internally, like we were so burnt out. We were so disconnected from ourselves. We were robots that were like imprisoned in this
Yeah.
beast that we had built, right? And we didn't really feel like there was a way out of this monotonous wake up at 4 a.m., go to bed at 9, do it all over again every day of the week. So, yeah, we kind of just hit a breaking point and we chose to walk away. But that was in the moment the hardest, most painful decision we ever made as entrepreneurs. But looking back was such a blessing because that courage really opened up so many more powerful opportunities for us to evoke change in the world. So I'm really grateful that we went through it.
Yeah, I mean, I could just hear the happiness in your voice for everything that
Yeah.
you do right now. So it's obviously been a good shift for you as a whole.
Yeah.
Now, getting into what you do and what you help people with, a lot of what you work with is kind of mindset related, right? Helping
Mhm.
coaches right now understand their clients' mindsets and how they perceive different aspects of things, and particularly their relationship with food, the relationship with themselves, and the relationship with the gym, right?
Yes.
So for someone that hasn't heard or maybe heard but isn't fully understanding of what that might be, what does a relationship with food even mean? Is
Right.
that like a relationship you have with someone else? Like, what does that even look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really cool question because that those words get slanged around the industry like crazy from clients and coaches alike, right? We want to establish a healthy relationship with food. We want to remove our negative relationship with food. And so ultimately, the way I like to look at it is I like to view food as if it was a person or a physical being in your life and sort of relate to it in that way as we go through this example. Because ultimately, when you're talking about building a relationship with something or someone, what it comes down to is how you're interacting with that thing, right? Or person, how you feel about that thing or person, how that thing or person makes you feel, who you are or who you pretend to be around that thing or person. And then the different identities that you sort of accumulate over the course of your life in order to fit what you expect yourself to be like around different people or different things. So when you're talking about food, it really is like, okay, which foods do you pretend to be, have your shit together, be on point, like you're hardcore health nut? And then which foods do you hold a completely different identity? And maybe there's some shame there. Maybe there's some heavy emotions rooted there that we need to unearth and work through, right? I think when you're looking at your relationship with food, it can't be a one-dimensional relationship. It really is looking globally around, how am I interacting with the different types of foods that I'm eating? How do I feel? How do they make me feel? And who do I pretend to be, or who am I really when I'm eating different foods? Because ultimately we do wear different faces. We do wear different identities. Just like when we go to a restaurant, we appear to the waitress as a different person than we do talking to our husband, right? Or our wife or whatever. So the same is true in all relationships, food included. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, it's like, just like if you were to survey every person you interact with in a day, just
Right.
like you survey every food you eat in a day, you're going to feel certain ways, act certain ways around those different people, around those different foods, essentially.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, okay, does this food nourish me? Yes or no? Does it nourish my body? Does it nourish my mind? Does it nourish my soul? And we don't want to pick our meals apart in that way all the time,
Mhm.
but I think it's really cool to zoom out and go, what are my eating habits like? When do I feel the best? What am I eating? When I feel my worst? What am I eating? And why do I feel that way? If there's sadness and shame linked to eating cookies and ice cream, where did I learn that? Who taught me that, right? Is that really my belief? Is that really my true relationship with that food? Or is that someone else's belief that I've sort
Mm.
of adopted? And I think that's a really cool place to be in, where you can become curious instead of judgmental of your different relationships with different foods, and learn which ones need to be healed and which ones maybe need to support the other ones, and step in and play a larger role when maybe we aren't maybe emphasizing those foods quite as much as we should be.
No, that's powerful. So now when you say, for instance, with cookies, like you mentioned, you have
Right.
that negative emotions tied to it, basically like a bad friend that always puts you down kind of
Yeah,
thing,
totally.
right?
Yeah.
How do you try to mend that relationship? Like where do you go from there? Do you just
Oh,
cut
that's
that
a
friend off like most people do, or do you
right.
figure something out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to understand, do I get something out of this? What
Mm.
is it that I get out of this? Do I enjoy eating cookies? Like, do I really like my grandma's cookies? And that's really soul nourishing for me. But eating a sleeve of Oreos is just kind of a coping mechanism that I've adopted over time. What are the
Mm.
contexts that I'm eating these cookies in? And how is it actually serving me in a positive way within these different contexts? And then you can sort of strip away and see, okay, maybe it's not the cookies. Maybe it's when I'm eating my grandma's cookies, I feel soul nourished because I feel connected to her, versus the other cookies, it's just like a bad friend that I go to because they make me feel safe in that moment, even though they're putting me down, even though they're
Mm.
eroding my confidence in myself. I can go to them and I know what I'm getting from them, right? We've all had those friends where we know we're going to get the hard truth, the reality check, and we go for it because we want to feel that way about ourselves in that moment, and that sometimes feels safe just because it's familiar, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So
So
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the way we start to heal the negative contexts, the negative moments, the negative pulls to use food as a coping mechanism instead of a nourishment tool is awareness. Number one, we need to become aware of which contexts are eroding our relationship with ourself. Where are we losing sight of who we are and using food as this replacement object to make us feel a certain way based on expectations we have of ourselves, right? So for example, in the example we just used, if I expect myself to always be happy, then in the moments when I feel sad, I may have learned to use cookies to make myself feel happy temporarily, right? And so we have to understand what role are they truly playing, and is that really my preference, or is that just a conditioned pattern that I need to become aware of and learn to strip away?
Yeah, no, that's powerful because now I think like a lot of people can relate to that to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially using it as a relatable example of people you might experience and
Right.
go through. Now, you came up with something really awesome that you kind of alluded to already, known as
Mm-hmm.
the faces of food, right? The
Yes.
different identities that food can provide for you. Do you want to go through that really quick and give people an idea of what those different faces are?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, exactly right. There are six. And the reason I came up with them, truth be told, is I was teaching my coaches how to understand the different ways that their clients interacted with food. So, this is the framework I came up with to help coaches identify what are the traits and indicators that someone is struggling with food in this really specific way, and how am I going to now help them through that so we can rewire their patterns. But it's just as powerful to go through this yourself. So from like a 30,000-foot view, the first six of the six faces is called the lover. And so with the lover, what's important to understand is the primary core need that drives most of our behaviors is connection. We thrive on connection. And when we don't feel like we're getting connection, we tend to cope. So in this instance, the person is typically coping by using food as that void filler for the lack of connection or perceived connection in their life. The thing about this face that's really interesting, though, that stands out from the other faces is that the behavior of eating usually occurs in private, or they attempt to hide their behavior from other people. So it's never something that's done publicly. There's usually shame or guilt attached to it. They're very consciously aware of their eating patterns. So if you ask them why they're eating or overeating or why they're choosing their foods, they know they feel lonely. They know they feel unloved. They know they feel disconnected. They can actively tell you that, which is unique to this phase. They're very aware of what's going on internally. Okay, so the
Mhm.
second phase of food is called the busybody. So the primary core need that's driving this type of person is actually certainty. So this person likes to know what is going on at every minute of every day. They're usually packing their schedule. They're usually like very controlling. They need to know the outcome they're getting from the actions that they're taking, right? So if this is you, likely you research the hell out of every sort of possible program that you could involve yourself with to figure out which is the most likelihood of success for you and your life, which is great. But you also really lack trust in uncertainty. You struggle to surrender to the process. You really try and death grip every step of the way, and you lack trust in yourself because of that. You aren't tapped into your hunger satiety cues. That's a really hard one for you to regain trust with, and so that's going to come into play around the way that you use food in your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
sounding good so far. Let's keep
Okay.
going.
The magician is the third one. So the magician also has the core need of certainty, which means like control or behaving in a way to create safety in their life, but it has the additional core need of uncertainty. So there's like this balancing act here. And really what happens with the magician is most often they eat to cope with monotony in their life. They eat to escape boredom. So these will be your boredom eaters, right? They want to feel in control, but they also have this competing core need that's driving their behavior that's saying, be spontaneous, who cares, treat yourself. So it's hard for them because they don't really know which voice to listen to. So
Mm.
they create a lot of structure in their life, and oftentimes they'll be pulled towards programs that are rigid, that are like track your macros, do X, Y, and Z, and you'll get X, Y, Z result. But it doesn't work well for them because their secondary core need of uncertainty pipes in and causes them to want to sabotage a lot. So this is where the magician will seek control, but not necessarily be able to adhere to that control. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like that one's me in some ways.
Oh, do you know what? I think I've been all of them at some point in my life. And it's normal to be more than one. It's just you'll probably have one that will be your dominant and will control most of your relationship with food. But you might be like, yeah, I'm all of those. Okay, that's great. Let's see which one is happening the most for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The big one.
The big one. Yeah, the big domino, I like to call it.
Yeah.
So the fourth one is called the bad boy. This is my favorite. So the bad boy has a primary core need of uncertainty. So the bad boy is driven by spontaneity. They're driven by some sort of chaos, by not being rigid, by having flexibility and freedom. But the tricky thing about the bad boy is that he tries or she tries to adhere to societal expectations around what weight loss requires. And so they shove themselves into rigid structured programs because they've learned that this is the way to do things. This is how I'm going to be successful, but nothing ever works because that's not the way that they're wired to receive information, to take action in their life, or to behave generally. So with the bad boy, if you're feeling like, I have all of these social groups and I go to the grocery store and I can never decide on a flavor of chips, I get 4. Or I can never decide on one flavor of ice cream, I get 3 different flavors. Or I never know what to order at a restaurant. There's so many options, right? If there's a lot of uncertainty showing up in your life in the form of spontaneity or flexibility or this desire to not want to follow the rules, a structured, rigid program will not work for you because your core needs do not support it. So it's important to figure that out about yourself so you can pick a program that is more flexibly focused. And even like if it fits your macros, protocols can feel too rigid sometimes. Just the simple act of tracking can sometimes be triggering. So working in flex days, working in cycles, that sort of thing can be really helpful for a bad boy to stay on track and constantly be stimulated by new or a variety of different targets to work towards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The fifth one is called the cheerleader. This one's awesome. They have a primary core need of significance. So they always do things to feel significant. But the thing is they don't know how to make themselves feel significant. So they're constantly looking externally for that recognition. And when they don't receive that external recognition, they turn to food as a reward for their good behavior. So for example, this is going to be the people who really struggle with not rewarding a good week on the weekend with a couple cheat meals, or not like always turning to food in order to feel like what they did was validated. And so this can be done in public or in private. The underlying desire here is simply to feel like they are making a difference, to feel like they are making a difference in other people's lives, and to feel recognized for that effort. So that one's a really, really common one, actually. And then the last one is the party animal. And the party animal's core need is connection. So the party animal is similar to the lover in that the core need is connection, but the party animal's behaviors always happen in public. So the party animal will be a social eater. They will want to connect with the social group that they're a part of, and they will almost chameleon themselves based on the expectations that they perceive that social group to have on them. So for example, if you're out with the girlfriends and everyone's ordering martinis, the expectation is that you will partake. If you're out with coworkers and everyone's ordering steak and potatoes, the expectation there, or perceived expectation, is that you will also order a steak and potatoes, right? We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves. We want to blend in and we want to maintain status quo. And we think that by adjusting the way we eat in these different groups, that will allow us to feel like we belong to whatever group we're in, which is an illusion. Of course, we logically know that, but human behavior tells us otherwise. So those are the 6 core needs that I've sort of identified. And I think it's really helpful to understand that, as someone who's trying to lose weight, you are wired uniquely. And not every program is designed for you. Just because you struggle to adhere to a certain program doesn't mean you failed that program. It probably means that your core underlying drivers, the way you're wired, right down into your DNA, does not match the way that program's being presented to you. So it's really important to understand, where are you feeling resistant? Where are you feeling uncomfortable? And not to be afraid to ask questions or ask for support in those areas, because very likely that's just your wiring. If you are thrown on this really restrictive plan and your gut is telling you like this isn't going to work long term, but then your mind kicks in and goes, yeah, but your friend Becky did it and she lost 15 pounds, and if she can do it, you can do it, right? Like, do your best to trust your body instead of always deflecting back to your mind, because your mind will justify anything. Your body will know what's right for you and what's not right for you. And I think if we can start to lean more into, what is my body telling me about this? What feels good and why doesn't this feel exactly like what I need, and letting that be okay, we would get so much further, so much faster, simply because we're honoring who we are and how we're actually wired to show up in this world.
Wow, I loved all of that. That was really good. So one thing,
Thanks.
so the one thing I want to ask, and more so for clarity,
Yeah.
is kind of with these foods, the faces of foods, you've listed a different core need for all of them.
Yes.
So then is that like a void that someone is having, and then food kind of fills that void to be that connection, to be that certainty? Is that kind of the
Mm.
idea here?
Yeah, so totally. So, what we need to know about human behavior is that we will always behave in a way to fulfill our top 1 to 2 core needs first. And if
Mm,
we perceive that those needs are not being filled, we will always find a way, even if it's disempowering, to fill them. Right.
mm,
So, in situations where we're coping with food, 9 times out of 10, one of your top 2 core needs is not being fulfilled in that moment. So let's just say, for example, you walk in after a really busy week. It's Friday night. You walk into your house a mess. Your kids are running around crazy, and your husband is sitting on the couch playing video games.
nightmare scenario.
Nightmare scenario for any wife, right? So you walk in and you're like, where does your mind go? I don't feel seen. He doesn't do anything around the house. I have to do everything. I don't feel connected to him. I don't feel connected to my family. He doesn't ask me what I need. I'm always doing everything for him, whatever, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
the story you start to spin. And in that moment, you're feeling a disconnection from your husband. You're feeling a disconnection from your kids, and you're feeling very alone. So if your core need is connection, you're probably going to search for something in that moment to make you feel the way that you want to feel, but you aren't feeling from the other people in your life. So
Mm,
likely you'll find yourself in the fridge. Maybe you'll sit down on the couch later that night and dig into the Ben and Jerry's, right? Whatever that looks like for you, that core need is getting filled. So what
mhm.
could you do instead? You could become aware of this pattern. You could become aware that, okay, I'm reacting in this moment. This doesn't feel comfortable for me. I'm starting to spin these stories. These are the thoughts I'm having. We can start to explore, what are the beliefs I have about this? Well, I believe that my husband should not be resting on the couch when the house is a mess. Like, I believe my kids should always behave. I believe my house should always be tidy. These beliefs are not valid. Like, they're not things that are really true, but we're not really logical people when we're thinking emotionally, right? So let yourself go there. What do you think should be happening right now? Because when our reality doesn't meet our expectation, we suffer. If instead you walked through that door and you saw your husband sitting on the couch and your kids were running around crazy, and you grabbed your kids and you gave them a hug, and you walked over to your husband and you gave him a kiss, and you didn't let the mess bother you, and you just were like, let's order pizza tonight, let's do a family game night, would you feel connected?
Mm.
Right? It's always about your perspective. It's always about, am I giving myself the opportunity to respond instead of react? Am I giving myself the space to feel what I have to feel and choose a different path forward that's more empowering for the life that I really do want to live? Or am I going to allow my patterning to hijack my behaviors and make me suffer in this moment? Right?
Mm, mhm. I think one thing you said there that I think is probably the key thing that no matter what your face of food is that you face with, as a pun, you kind of need to slow down, think, and then analyze what's going on and seeing like, is
Yes.
this actually reality, or is this like
Yes.
the story I'm making up in my head to because of a false
Yes.
expectation I had, right?
Yes, yes. And I think for anyone who's going to practice this without guidance, I would say expect it to be a slow journey
Mm,
and be self compassionate and like start a practice of reflection. Begin journaling or making notes anytime you notice yourself react and think about eating. Just start there. Even just
mhm.
start like tallying it. Okay, I reacted and wanted to eat 10 times today. And then the next time, what does that reaction feel like? And then the next time, what's the thought I'm having in that moment? And then start to reflect on it. What are the beliefs I'm attaching to these thoughts? And then just very slowly, you're able to tiptoe deeper and deeper and deeper. Because the thing about these reactions is they're so fast, they're entirely subconscious that you have to create what I call the pause
Mhm.
between the emotion and the action so that you have time to process it and choose a different pathway if you want. But that doesn't happen overnight. You have to be patient with yourself and recognize awareness as the first step is the most challenging step. And a lot of people stay on that step for a few weeks, and that's okay. That is progress as long as you are consistently becoming aware faster to these pathways.
Yeah, I like that you said it's going to take time and be slow because for a lot of people, they've been stuck in these routines for years,
Oh
right? And
yeah.
they're super automatic.
Oh yeah.
And you're not, if it's automatic, you're not going to be thinking about it, right? So having awareness about your automaticities is
Yeah.
nearly impossible early on,
Yes,
right?
exactly. It's like, yeah, it's like interrupting, it's like stopping a moving train,
Oh,
right? Like it's just
exactly.
plowing down the road and you expect to just stand in front of it and it's just going to stop. Like it's not. And
Hmm.
the pathway is going to continue to happen even once you recognize it's happening. You may even have resistance to changing it because guess what? That pathway feels good in some way, shape, or form. It may not serve your weight loss goals, but it feels good to eat in that moment and give yourself what you need. It feels way harder to say no. I'm going to feel disconnected. I'm going to
Hmm.
let myself feel sad about this. I'm going to go have a vulnerable conversation with my husband and tell him what I need. That's work. Like, that's the hard part, right? But when you can do that, you don't need the ice cream at 10 o'clock at night sitting on the couch because you gave yourself what you needed.
Hmm. That's it's actually funny you bring that up. Just like 2 days, yesterday, actually Monday, I released a podcast about why breaking bad habits is so hard, and
Mhm.
it's because all of these things that you're doing they make you feel good,
Yes,
and even though they hurt you in the long run, right now in this moment when you're feeling uncomfortable, it brings you comfort, and
exactly. Yes.
and the thing to make you feel comfortable in the long term is going to be super uncomfortable right now. But
Yes.
I think like we as a society, since there's so much instant gratification going on right now, we get turned off by the idea of waiting to feel
Mm.
good and being in control again. How do you help someone overcome that mindset of, if it's not going to happen now, what's the point, kind of thing?
I love that question. So here's what I do still work with a couple nutrition clients. I'm actually working with someone who's struggling with this exact thing right now. So here's what I
Perfect.
told her. Okay. And here's what I tell all of my clients in this situation. You either get to choose to be in pain now, or you get to choose to be in pain forever. Being in pain
Mm,
now means pausing, facing your emotion, looking at your thoughts, and being willing to feel uncomfortable temporarily so that we can move past this. Being in pain forever means continuing on with this pathway, reaching for ice cream to feel better right now, but consistently continuing to struggle with doubt, with fear, with feeling not enough, with hating your body, or whatever it is that's coming up for you. So the choice is yours. You can choose to be in pain temporarily right now, or you can choose to be in pain for the rest of your life. So ultimately, what I'm asking the client to do is to attach a new meaning to what being in pain now looks like, right? Being in
mm,
pain right now means feeling some really hard things, but I want to explore that because that means freedom for the rest of my life. So it's just a matter of understanding that If you're not in a place where you're willing to feel pain right now, that is 1000% totally okay, right? That's
Hmm.
so fine. You'll get there. But what you need to practice while you're waiting to get to that place is awareness. Get to know yourself, right? Just being aware of, where are my triggers? Where are my patterns showing up? What foods do I habitually reach to feel better about myself? Why is that? What's the belief I have around what I'm going to lose if I give this food up? It's not always about what am I going to gain when I give this food up, because that's what we talk about a lot. Like, when I
Right.
give up ice cream, I'll lose 10 pounds. That's a gain. What am I going to lose? I'm going to lose security when I'm feeling sad. I'm going to lose comfort when I'm feeling lonely. I think it's just as powerful to explore what their perceptions of loss are around these coping mechanisms as our perspectives of gain are. And even just exploring those both sides might be an eye opener to go, I'm afraid of losing comfort when I feel sad by giving up ice cream. Where else could I find comfort?
Hmm.
Right? If that's really what I'm using it for, what else could I use? And being willing to try some of those things to see if they work for you.
Nice. So you're basically replacing food
Mhm.
as a source of comfort and finding something else that also makes you comfortable, but isn't going to have the long term negative impacts that all this added food would give you.
Right, exactly. I think there's two solutions to the problem. Either we shift our perspective around how we're using the food and we stop using the food simply because of that shift in perspective, or we replace the food with something else. Those are kind
Hmm.
of the two options, right? If we
Yeah.
want to escape this pathway. So, if the perspective shift isn't powerful enough, we may need to insert a new vehicle to achieve their core needs. So, if connection is their core need and that's what they're using food for, I would say let's find a new vehicle. Do we
Hmm.
need to call a friend in those moments? Do we need to snuggle our children? Do we need to play with our dog? Like, what are some instant gratification activities that we could do in those triggering moments that could give us a quick little hit of connection, or certainty or uncertainty or whatever it is that you're chasing using food, so that we're less likely to use food? And this doesn't work unless you're aware first,
Hmm.
right? Like, we can't just layer on all of this extra shit and think that, if we do enough things, we'll be distracted for long enough when we won't eat. That's not the point. The
Hmm.
point is actively choosing to say, no, I'm not going to eat because that's giving me the connection as an illusion. I'm going to go play with my kids for 5 minutes because that actually leaves me filled up instead of empty.
Yeah, I think that was a good point you made. Is you can't just walk around the problem and pretend it's not there by doing other things that
Oh,
maybe they might help you, do the weight loss that you wanted. But in the end, that problem is still a problem when you face that food again, when you face that discomfort again, right?
exactly, exactly. It's like we're not fixing the subconscious pathway is still going to be there unless we
Hmm.
change it, right? So unless we do something to interrupt that pattern, it's going to continue to run on autopilot. So, like you said, the next time that situation presents itself or something similar, we are going to be triggered again. And then all we're relying on are these external strategies combined with willpower to make sure we don't cope with food.
I like that. But now we talk about how, we either get rid of the food or replace the food with something.
Mhm.
But now when you address this problem head on and if you find the root cause of what's disturbing you, you fill that void externally through not food, or internally through
Mhm.
whatever you needed. How does your relationship with food change? How is your relationship with food better now? Like, if you still want to
Right.
eat that food, is it still going to cause the same trigger cycle once again? Are you going to relapse into those negative emotions, or are you going to be able to eat that pretty freely? Like, what happens at that point?
Well, I think a few things happen when you shift your patterns, when you are become more aware of why you're using that food, how it's showing up in your life, the way that you're coping with it, and you do the work to change that pattern so that you no longer feel like that food is giving you connection, or you get connection in other ways. If we just stick on that same example, then the way you interact with that food changes as well, right? You're no longer relying on that food to fill a void. You're now just thinking about it in a completely different way. Maybe it can now become an optional, nourishing food for you during different times in your life. Like, if it's cookies and you really just do love cookies, Now, instead of just eating them mindlessly to feel some sort of connection or safety or whatever that is, now you could maybe have two and
Mhm.
enjoy them and not feel compelled to keep binging on them because you have no ulterior motive other than to really enjoy those cookies, right? So when we remove that emotionally driven component, food becomes food again, right?
Mhm.
We're no longer codependent on it to fill this void in our life. So your relationship with that particular food absolutely changes. You may not even feel compelled to eat that food anymore. But I think the important thing to note here is the food was never triggering you. It was what was going on around you that was triggering you. Your food was the symptom of that trigger. The food is what
Mhm.
you use to feel better in that moment. So to be afraid of relapsing because you ate cookies again when you spent 6 months off of cookies discovering yourself is silly because the cookie was never the trigger.
Mhm.
So I think that really comes back to a lot of learning to trust yourself and experimenting. And like when you go to eat that cookie again, be present, pay attention. Do you feel triggered? Do you have an emotional response? Are you afraid of the cookie? Right? What are you really afraid of? Are you
Mhm.
afraid of past memories of feeling disconnected? Is that trauma coming back? Is that
Mhm.
affecting you, right? Like what's really going on? Because it's never about the food. So if we can just be okay to be curious about what's going on in those moments, I think you'll just give yourself so much space to be compassionate and to meet yourself where you're really at and to not judge what happens, but rather just use that as an opportunity to learn and grow more as a person.
So then, awareness isn't just the first step at that point, right? Awareness is this consistent thing that you're always being aware of and how you're feeling, right? It's your gauge of seeing the progress you're making and how what you were aware of at first is different than where you are right now and what you're feeling, right?
Yes. And I think, yes, 100%. And once you start practicing awareness, recognize that it's in every aspect of your life. Right
Mm.
now, you're really focused on eating and food and how you're using food to cope and the cycle you're stuck in. It feels all consuming, right? But you're not just using food, you're also using other things. And you're also reacting with other people. And you're also treating yourself a really specific way because you have these expectations on yourself and you have expectations of others, right? And so when you start to become aware in all aspects of your life, not just around food, but how do I feel when I walk in and my husband doesn't say hi to me? How do I
Mhm.
feel when, my sister says a mean remark about my weight, even though I've lost 10 pounds? Like all of these things, they aren't necessarily directly tied to food, but wouldn't you like to see your relationships improve in your life as well? Wouldn't you like to start to talk to yourself better? Wouldn't you like to be closer with your kids? All of that happens when you start to become more aware of how you've been conditioned to react when the situation you're in doesn't meet the expectations you had. And so, really just understanding, oh, these expectations were passed down to me. I have the choice to change them. And that's actually going to make me better in every aspect of my life, not just with my relationship with food, but with everyone, including myself.
Yeah, no, that's super powerful. I think like how you said, in stoicism they say like expectation is the root of all disappointment, right?
Yes.
The anytime you're disappointed, it's because of an unmet expectation.
Yes.
And I think for a lot of people, they think that everyone has the same expectations, but really you can change your expectations at any moment and shift how you feel at any moment too.
Yes, 100% you can, but you can't unless you're aware of them.
Right. Awareness precedes change in that way.
Awareness precedes change, but also if you're in judgment of them, you also can't change them.
Mm.
So you can't become aware and then judge yourself because you had this expectation. You have to be gentle. You have to be compassionate if you want to change it. Judgment blocks change from happening because it keeps us stuck in this negative place. So watch yourself. Your brain will instantly go to judgment. We're conditioned to do it. Society
Mhm.
teaches us to do this, right? We judge all the time. The sky is blue. That's a judgment, right? So practice awareness from this unbiased perspective, from this curious onlooker, right? Isn't it interesting that when I walked in, that was my first thought? Isn't it interesting that when I was faced with this challenge, this is where my mind went? This is how I felt. Where did I learn that? And now it's like a fun journey, right? It doesn't feel fun all the time. It feels really hard a lot of the time, but when we aren't judging ourselves, it becomes a lot more productive and it opens up new pathways for us that weren't available before.
And a lot of times I think like you said, judgment blocks that because you're afraid of what the new judgment becomes as a result of change
Yeah.
too, right?
Yeah. Judgment is sort of a buffer for vulnerability.
Mm.
It's like, I'm going to look at it, but I'm going to judge it so that I don't have to be vulnerable with it. Right? Because vulnerability is one of the hardest things we can practice with ourselves and with other people. And so it's kind of like, yeah, I see that's there. I'm not ready to face it yet. So I'm just going to throw a layer of judgment over top of it because that's my way to deflect. And that's fine. That's just your brain trained and keeping you safe. It wants to keep you the same. It wants to sustain the way that it currently is. And if you're vulnerable with yourself, it has to change. Right? So if you're judging yourself, you're just really blocking your vulnerability and your capacity for true change.
Yeah. Wow. That is mic drop right there, honestly. Okay. Well, Laura, I really appreciate everything you've had to share. I'm sure all the listeners appreciate what you've had to share as well. I have one more question for you, but before I ask that question,
Okay.
tell the people where they can find you and where if they want to see more of your stuff.
Yeah, awesome. So I am at Laura Poburan on all social channels. So you can find me there. And then laurapoburan.com. I have tons of free mini trainings, lots of free resources, workshops, that sort of thing. So if you want to dive deeper into any one topic, you can search it all up there and it'll all be right there for you.
Yeah, awesome. I'm actually going to link all of that in the show notes. So if that interests you, feel free to scroll down, check it out. And now for the last question, this podcast. No, it's okay. Just relax. Bring the shoulders down. So this is called the Not So Stupid podcast, and we focus a lot on simplicity. So what is one or a few simple things that someone can start doing right after they finish listening to this podcast that can dramatically improve their life?
Okay, so everyone has homework to turn off this podcast and journal how they felt when I was talking about identity, when I was talking about your relationship with food. Where did you feel triggered? Where did you feel resistance? Let's start practicing that awareness right now, because that's what you need to practice anytime you take in information, anytime you're faced with a new environment. Start to get curious around, what does that mean for me? Why did I feel resistant when Laura was talking about the busybody? Maybe that's a mirror she was holding up for me to look at myself more deeply, right? So that's absolutely what I would say for you to do. Pull out a scrap piece of paper and journal what felt hard for you to receive and explore why that was, and then carry that practice forward into the rest of your evening, into the rest of this week, and see what you can discover about yourself.
Man, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't have any expectations going into your answer, but I definitely didn't expect that one, and that was a really good response to the question.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
Yeah, of course. That's I think like that's the best thing anyone could do right now. So I really appreciate that response. Again, I really appreciate your time too, as well, sharing everything and being so fun to interview with.
Thank
This
you.
has been a great time. Thank you also everyone that has listened. If you want to see more of Laura's stuff, once again, it is in the show notes, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you. See you soon.